Hey guys, this is Akshay Sura. Today we'll be talking about SiteCron. SiteCron is a Sitecore scheduling module which is used to schedule precision-based scheduling jobs. All right, so by default, Sitecore scheduling gives us interval-based scheduling jobs which you can run, but the timing is not guaranteed. The reason why it's not guaranteed is because it's interval-based. So if you set it to 10 seconds or 15 seconds and you need it to hit at a specific time at the hour, you won't be able to guarantee that each time you reset your app pool, there would be an issue in terms of guaranteeing the scheduling time. So SiteCron by default has different kinds of scheduling jobs depending on what you need it to do. You can definitely customize one. So by default, the SiteCron job uses Quartz.net, which is a scheduling third-party free scheduling plugin, which we use as part of our .NET project. So you just inherit the iJob implementation, and you can make it do anything you want, and then integrate it into your scheduling job and schedule it via SiteCron. The other type of job you could have is a Sitecore Powershell job, which is one of my favorites. The reason why it's my favorite is as long as you install the PowerShell extensions onto your instance, anything you could do with PowerShell, you could do it with SiteCron. So as you know, PowerShell is very powerful. It lets you do a ton of things in Sitecore. Adam and Michael have put in a lot of work into it. So for me, most of my configuration jobs are all PowerShell based, whether it be pulling it from a REST API or running indexing or anything of that sort. I primarily rely on it. And in terms of code deployment, I don't have to do a code deployment for it because PowerShell's already on the destination servers. And all I have to do is propagate the item with the PowerShell script. And in a hurry, if you really needed to get something out there, you could technically open the content editor, plug in a PowerShell script, and then schedule that. One of the other things you could do is there's a few requirements when you're running a job. If you need that scheduled job to show up in your jobs viewer for Sitecore, and if that is a requirement, your DevOps team looks at it. One of the things you could do is you could run a SiteCron job as a Sitecore job, so you can see it in the jobs viewer. Not necessary, but depending on your requirements and what your DevOps team or the infrastructure team needs to monitor your servers, it might be a requirement. One of the other things you could do is run a existing Sitecore schedule command, and a lot of companies have pre-existing schedule commands in Sitecore, and you could run those in SiteCron just to get the precision of when you need it executed. So for instance, if your client or company is traded on the stock market, there's certain press releases which need to go out at a specific time. So once they are done through the workflow, maybe you have a job which publishes them out at a specific time because it needs to be done according to the SEC rules or anything of that sort, anything time sensitive. This would be a perfect tool for you to use for that. And it came out of a requirement from one of the MVPs as to, hey, how do I run? We don't want to redeploy code. We want to run existing Sitecore command jobs. Is it something we can do? And this is what we came up with. So as I mentioned, out of the box, you get two types of jobs. One is Site Smart Publish, and you could specify which database it is and things like that, as well as the Execute PowerShell job, along with the capability of you creating your own custom iJob implementations to do whatever you need to. These two are kind of giving you the example of how you would implement an iJob. The source is open source. It's on GitHub for you to take a look at it and customize it whichever way you choose to. Okay, so as I mentioned, SiteCron scheduling, you could schedule it based on a cron expression or an exact time you need a job executed. So cron expressions are these seemingly uncomplicated expressions once you get to know them. So it's based on which second, minute, hour, day of how you want this job scheduled. Either you want it one time, or if you need it to be executed at the same time every day, week, month, you can take it. It's usually based on a cron expression. I typically don't try to memorize these things, and I just use the cron maker website to put in the schedule I'm looking for. It generates a cron expression, and I just use it as part of the scheduling purpose. One of the other things you could also do is to specify an exact time. So either something which repeats itself or something which has to go in at a specific date and a specific time, and that's something you can do with SiteCron. Today, what we'll try to do is we'll try to go over some of the guts of SiteCron, so you understand it a little bit more and implement it. One of the things I request anyone using SiteCron to do is that go put in those bugs or feature requests on GitHub so we can look at it, validate it, and then try to resolve it. The other thing as well is if you are facing any issues, and people have reached out to me when implementing this module to just ask questions or to come up with ideas of how it can be improved, just please do so. So today we'll try to cover a few of the things in SiteCron. We'll go through how to install it, what comes out of the box, what do the configs mean, what can you do, what's in progress, and things like that. So we will go through some of these topics listed on my slide. These links, and again, the deck is most likely going to be made available. So these links give you access to GitHub, the NuGet package. GeekHive has done a really good blog post recently on it, as well as my blog has a ton of blog posts on SiteCron. And then the cron maker link for you to play around with the cron expressions and come up with the expression which fits you best. Okay, so let's get into installing SiteCron. There's a couple of different ways. Try to keep the marketplace install up to date, but usually I'm behind on those. The best way to install it is via NuGet. NuGet has the latest package, and if you need the source, it's on GitHub, and you can easily access that and do your build. If you found a bug and you can't wait for me to fix it, you're more than welcome to do a pull request and then fix the bug and push it up, and I'll be more than happy to look at it and integrate it in. And credit where credit's due. Obviously, you'll get the credit for fixing the bug or adding a specific feature, which would help a lot. One of the things I like installing on my SiteCron installs is PowerShell for Sitecore. It's not needed, it's optional, but since most of my jobs run using the PowerShell extensions, that's something which I do naturally. All right, so that's that. Let me close this guy out. Clean. Okay. As you can see, I have a plain vanilla Sitecore 8.2.7 running on this instance. I have PowerShell installed on it, but nothing else. As you can see, the modules is pretty empty. What we're going to try to do is we'll install SiteCron on top of this and then try to see how it works. Okay, so first let's get to NuGet. This is where you can see all the versions for SiteCron which have already been pushed out. 3.0.4 is the latest version. So the best way to install it is copy the install package, and usually using the package manager console inside of Visual Studio is the best way to do it. So in Visual Studio, I basically set up a plain vanilla web project. All I have in here is the web config from the Sitecore install I've done. As you can see, it doesn't really have any app config or anything of that sort. We have the package manager console. I'm going to go ahead and install SiteCron using NuGet. So right off the bat, what it does is it installs a couple of different things. So Quartz.net, as I mentioned, Quartz is dependent on the common login. In the later versions of Quartz, they took out the dependency. But for this one, we are kind of tied into it. And as you can see, SiteCron is installed as well. Along with the install, we get a few config files. One of the config files, which is kind of new for the later versions, is the jobs. So all the jobs for SiteCron are item-based, or predominantly were item-based before this, but there was a requirement where what if I needed some jobs based on configuration and based on the config transforms, I can push it to different environments to do different things. So we came up with this where you could actually load jobs for SiteCron via config. That's something you can definitely explore and see if it fits the bill, but once you understand SiteCron a little bit more based on item-based, I think this will become a little bit easier for you to take a look at and play around with. The other config we get out of the box is the SiteCron.config, which goes in. As you can see, there's a few settings in here for the environment. Again, it's just a variable used for you to do whatever you want with it. There are a couple of different ones. So this highly experimental saved handler is something which I wrote, which I play around with from time to time. So there was a requirement where what if I need to schedule an item based on a workflow? What if I need to schedule an item whenever I want? So there is a way to look at your published restrictions of an item, and based on your published restrictions, it will auto schedule that item for you. Again, it's very highly experimental. You can play with it. The code is included as part of the GitHub, but by default, we don't enable that. There's a concept of execute now in SiteCron. So you might have a job scheduled already, but for whatever reason, you need to execute at that moment in time. So instead of modifying the cron expression or duplicating it, you could just right click and say execute now. And for that, we just need to give a little bit of a lead time for us to reload the job into quartz.net to execute it. And this is basically talking about the timer it needs. The other setting you see here is the context DB. So just to give you an idea, predominantly SiteCron is supposed to run on the CM or the primary CM instance of your install. For some cases, so in my case, one of the installs I had, we had the sitemap gzip files generated on the CD instances. And for that purpose, we needed SiteCron on the CD instances. The CD instances run off of web or whichever database you configure in your connection strings as, and that's where you can modify this value for you to point it to whichever database you need it to load the jobs off of. But by default, it comes off of master. All right, so the next one I would like to go through are the events. And again, the reason why we're going through the config is for you guys to get a better understanding of the configuration, what you would need on which instance, and the more you understand it, the better you can deploy it using your CI/CD pipeline. And as well as if something's not needed on a specific instance, you know which config to pull out of it. So the events are there for a couple of different aspects. One is visual, to show the icon, to show enabled and disabled, as well as the saved as and the deleted are there to recognize if a job is modified or disabled or deleted, in which case we don't want Quartz to run it. We want it to recalibrate itself by reloading all the jobs. So those are the events for that. We have our typical initialize pipeline again, which loads up SiteCron, gets it ready to get going, loads all the jobs. We have a few registrations in here for DI, but the one I'm going to call out is this specific one. So as I mentioned, you can load jobs based on config. You can load jobs based on items from the database. By default, we enable the registration, which enables the provider, which loads both. In your case, if you're just loading config or just database, more than welcome to just uncomment the one which is specific to your case. The last one is a Log4net appender. So we tried to write it to a different log name, and this just happened a couple of versions ago, where it was kind of getting cluttered in the regular log, and to find your jobs triggered or anything like that was a little bit difficult. But this is what we did to push it to a different log. So if you're like me and if you install it based on NuGet, you need a package in order for you to install it in Sitecore, because we do need items and the definitions and the templates for all of these jobs. I included 2 of these as a folder inside of the install when it comes through NuGet. One is just an items only package, so just the items, and then when you publish this solution or the project, you would get the files with it and the configuration with it. Or you have a full package as well, so it'll install the files as well as the items. It's totally up to you what you would like to do, but typically what I do is that once I install it, I copy this file over to the data packages folder, install it, and then I delete this folder off of my code base so it's not available. All right, so let me get there real quick. So we have our 2 folders. On the left, you can see the folder for our solution and the 2 packages, the NuGet loaded. On the right, you see the packages folder. So I am going to just take my items package and dump it into my packages folder. It's just easier rather than uploading it, but you're more than welcome to upload it. Back to our Sitecore instance, I'm just going to come over here, developer tools, installation wizard. So instead of uploading, we took the shortcut. So I already placed it in the packages folder. So I'm going to do SiteCron items only. Go ahead and install it. And this should give us everything we need. I'm going to go ahead and restart the Sitecore client, come back in. And now if you notice, we do have the SiteCron templates folder as well as the modules folder inside of SiteCron. Now that we have this available here, let me get back here, and I typically just delete this folder because I have no need for it anymore. If you need it, pull it from GitHub, or you can get it from the marketplace at that point. Great. All right, so by default, we have a few templates here. So one of them, which is the most important one, I guess, is the SiteCron job template. And this is the way you can treat it is it's like a base template which has all the necessary information for SiteCron to recognize that it's a job. You can definitely inherit that into another job or template you come up with. Maybe you have a requirement which needs a little more information for the job. So typically what you could just do is just inherit the SiteCron job, so you get all the base fields, and then add more fields on top of it if that's what your job requires. Let's scroll up a little bit. So in the module SiteCron, as you can see, there's a few, there's an out-of-the-box folder. As you can see, there's an item bucket called execution reports. We will get into that shortly. There's an auto folder, so essentially anything when it's run on like execute now, it drops a copy of the job, renames it, dumps it into the auto folder, executes it, and then archives it. So that way, it's kept clear. We have a few jobs which are out of the box. We'll take a look at a couple of them today. One of them is basically trying to use the Powershell job to run a small script which writes to the log. We have the smart publish. Again, as you can see, you can pass in parameters to any of these and then use them inside of your jobs. Again, these are all disabled. You have a job which runs as a Sitecore job, so you can see it in the jobs viewer, and then a sample job which shows you how to run an existing Sitecore schedule command. And as you can see, it is running the rebuild suggested index test index scheduled Sitecore command. So we're using the inbuilt one. Obviously you don't need any of the I'm not adding anything additional other than the SiteCron, what's needed by SiteCron, to your instance. Okay. All right, so now that we have the items available in here, all that's missing is the code, so the binaries as well as the configs for us to push it over. Let's get back here. We have everything set up. We have the publish settings set up so that it publishes to the folder. That's the right folder, so let's go ahead and publish that. So we get the configuration as well as the DLLs in our destination folder. Looks like everything went through. Okay, so let's take a look at what we deployed. As you can see, we have our two config files. We would probably have the SiteCron binary in here as well. So we're ready with the website. Let's get out there, and then now just reload. And then once it gets back, we can take a look at how to execute some of these jobs. So once your instance reloads, let's look at one of the jobs. This specific job is a PowerShell script job based off of a base SiteCron job. So essentially, in your SiteCron jobs, you specify the namespace of where the iJob implementation from Quartz is. In this case, they're pre-built, just like Smart Publish is. There's a cron expression. At this moment, it's set to run daily at 3:56 p.m. there is an option for you to specify the exact date and time this needs to get executed. So for instance, if you have a press release which needs to go out at a specific date and a specific time, you could specify it as part of this. But if you do have both of these values specified, SiteCron will take the exact date and time over a cron expression. The next one down are the parameters. So the parameters can be passed in as a similar to a query string parameters. You could pass in as many as you like. And then the only caveat to that is your job should be able to consume those. So as long as you implement your job to look for these parameters and use it, that's great. There is an option to specify items as well. So if your job requires one or more items for you to process, this would be a perfect place for you to specify that. As part of the items for this specific job, so we are going to be running PowerShell script. So even though you could specify multiple PowerShell scripts inside of here, it is not going to execute all of them. The code is out there. I commented it out in the job, but the reason for this is you don't want script dependency and it taking forever, one script daisy chaining into the other one. So I only limit it to one script. So it'll pick the top one script from this item and then run it if you specify more than that. But if your requirement is that you want to run multiple scripts one by one, you can definitely look into the code for this implementation and re-enable some of the code I had commented out to loop through these items and execute them. One of the things I use pretty often is if it's like a one-time kind of job, which I just need it to run and disappear, set the archive after execution. It uses the Sitecore archiving function to just archive this item itself. There is a disable, as you can see. So if you re-enable and save it, you can see the icon, just a visual cue for you to know which jobs are enabled and which jobs are disabled. I'm going to go ahead and disable that, and you can see that. We do have this stats section kind of deprecated in my mind. I'm trying to get away from it because we have created the concept for execution reports. But it gives you a little bit of stats on when it ran, when it's going to run, how long did it take, all in UTC. But it's something I'm trying to get away from, but it's updating both the stats as well as the execution report at this moment in time. So what we'll try to do is I'm going to go ahead and run execute now. What that will do is it'll make a copy of that item, set the timer based on the config we set, which is 10 seconds at this moment, 10 seconds in the future, which is relatively not that long. It will execute that. Once it executes it, it is going to disappear because it's an execute now item. It gets archived. And if you look at, I'm going to refresh this real quick. We keep on talking about the execution report, and essentially it's an item bucket where it keeps track of every job which was run, when it was run, anything you have logged as part of it, and what was the job ID. So in this case, because it was an execute now job, it's archived by default, it can't find it, but imagine it being an actual job which you're currently running day by day, hour by hour, whatever that is. You will have a reference to that specific item. As you can see in the log, what I do myself is for this log, I keep a running log of all the actions being taken in that job, and then at the end of the job there is a way for you to feed it back to SiteCron, so it dumps it into the execution report. Very useful when you have long running jobs which are doing a lot of processing, especially with feeds or anything of that sort. I personally use it a lot. The next one we'll try to take a look at is I'm going to try to re-enable this job to be able to auto run. So let me go ahead and do that. It's 11. Let's do 11:11 just because. Save that. Let's just make sure it's enabled. And then once it's enabled, essentially every time you modify or delete or add a new SiteCron job, in here or anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a specific place. You could create a folder structure under SiteCron. It doesn't have to be in there out of the box. It reloads all the jobs, and then that's for Quartz to know what to do. One of the things we are currently working on is we're on Quartz 2.6, 2.x, I guess, but the Quartz 3 version has asynchronous job executions, which is going to be very, very useful, which is something which we're working on. We'll get into it probably later on this year. You read. Let's wait for that to run. 11:11. 30 more seconds. Okay, so our job should have triggered by now. Let's take a look at the item itself. Kind of gives us the idea that yes, it has run. It took very little time because all the job is trying to do is log an entry into the log, so it shouldn't really take that much time. So it'll tell us when it's going to run next. Again, it's UTC, so it's kind of pain for you to calculate the next time, but something which sits there. If we look at the execution report, you can see that the job got executed. As you can see, it's because it's an existing job, it didn't get archived. You get the direct item link for which job ran, again, what the log was, and when it ran last. Okay, looking at our SiteCron job, as you can see, this is exactly the time where we modified the job and it reloaded it. One of the things it does is it specifies which version of SiteCron it's currently running when it reloads everything. Again, when it reloads, it'll specify if it's a database-based item or if it's a config-based, and if it's loaded or not loaded. In our case, there's only one job loaded because only one is enabled. Which is the Powershell job which we have. And as you can see, one of the reasons why I originally created SiteCron is there are some jobs which need to get run at a specific time. And if I can't guarantee that, it's a problem for the customer or the client. And the reliability of running a job on a specific time depends on which job you're running and for what purpose. But in my case, I needed it. As you can see, it runs exactly to the second, so it's very precise. And it executed it. It knows what kind of job it is, and it says it's done. And we modified the stats of the job item. So because we did that, it doesn't reload because those are things related to the stats and nothing related to an actual job which a person modified. When we look at the SPE log, as you can see, we had executed it one for execute now. Exactly at 11:11, we executed the script, and the script comes in. It says, hey, it's a sample log entry, parameter is null, and we are done. So it's fairly easy for you to set these up. They run on time every time as long as your instance is awake and running. So this kind of shows us how a SiteCron job runs, how the logging is done in the SiteCron config. All right, so for Sitecore Stack Exchange, I can't advocate for it enough. Every Sitecore resource, I would expect you to be signed up for this. There's over 3,000 people signed up who help answer questions, ask questions. A very good resource for you to get knowledge and help other people if you choose to. Another great tool is Sitecore Slack. Again, over 3,000 people from around the world who are there answering questions, chatting about Sitecore live. So it's an amazing tool. It's my go-to tool for me to go there every time I have a question or something answered. And again, something about me, you can reach me on social channels, on Twitter, as well as on Slack. I hope this presentation was useful to you, and hopefully this will help you get better results from your scheduling tests.